Rest here, traveler. Tonight, we follow the many footsteps of Apollo, the god who healed the sick, cursed the wicked, sang through oracles, and scorched the skies with his arrows. But this isn't just one tale. It's a flowing compilation of every powerful story ever whispered in his name, told in one continuous soothing voice, made for deep relaxation or restful sleep. If you find comfort in myths like these, subscribing means a new divine journey will be waiting for you every night to drift peacefully into dreams. The god of prophecy, music, healing, and light, known for his far-reaching arrows and radiant presence, was worshipped in many places, but few held his presence as strongly as the central and northern regions of Greece and the Aegean Islands. Among these sacred lands, two places stood out above all: the white rock of Leucatras, a place of myth and sacrifice, and the revered sanctuary of Delos, the fabled birthplace of the god himself. These places were not just marked by altars and statues, but were landscapes imbued with reverence, echoing the hymns of poets and the silent prayers of pilgrims who journeyed across hills and seas to offer devotion. In the rugged terrain of Aetolia, specifically near the city of Calydon, nestled quietly was a temple dedicated to this god, under the title Laphrios. The land around Calydon, though simple and untamed, carried the weight of divine memory, and the temple stood firm as a reminder of how deeply the people honored their protector. Further west, the lands of Acarnania opened into the glistening Gulf of Ambracia. As ships sailed into the Gulf, the first land to greet them on the starboard side belonged to the Acarnanians. Here, close to the Gulf's entrance, rose the sacred precinct of Apollon Actios, a hill crowned by a temple, standing tall and visible, surrounded by a peaceful plain. At the base of this sacred hill lay a grove of trees, quiet and still, guarding a naval station that once bore witness to a momentous dedication. For it was here that Caesar, having emerged victorious in a fierce battle against Mark Antony, offered the first spoils of his triumph, a squadron of 10 ships now resting under the god's watch. From this moment of war and divine favor, the city of Nicopolis emerged and grew, flourishing with life and pride. Within its outer reaches lay a sprawling sacred area, split into 2 domains. One part rested in the sacred grove, complete with a gymnasium and a stadium, designed for the grand quinquennial games. The other part extended up the hill sacred to the god, rising above the grove, where athletes and citizens alike gathered to celebrate the Actia. These games, once modest and local, had now become Olympian in stature, elevated by Caesar's decree and watched over by the Lacedaemonians. In earlier days, the surrounding villagers had celebrated the Actia as games of honor, with a victory marked not by riches, but by a simple wreath. Now, under the eye of empire and the hand of the god, the games took on new splendor, echoing the laughter, sweat, and cheers of those who believed that every foot race and discus throw brought them closer to divine grace. The western banks of the Achelous River also belonged to the Acarnanians, extending as far as the Ambracian Gulf, near the Amphilochoi and the temple of Apollon Actios, tying the river, the gulf, and the god together in sacred geography. The Cape of Action, which marked the mouth of the gulf, held the same name as the temple itself, and the harbour on its seaward side served as a gateway to those who came bearing prayers or tributes. It was not only a place of worship, but a place of history, for as recorded by travellers and emperors alike, it was off this very cape that Augustus fought and won his fateful naval battle against Mark Antony, a clash that shaped the course of empire and gave the cape a new myth of power. The Roman emperor did not just win the battle. He honored the god who had witnessed it, founding a colony there, and with it, raising the temple of Apollo to even greater fame. The site of Actium thus became not just a marker of war, but of rebirth, glory, and enduring devotion. And far to the west, where the land narrows and the sea stretches wide, stood Leucatras, the white rock, a wind-swept promontory on the island of Leucas. Though less adorned than Delos or Actium, this place held a haunting, sacred power. For it was here, on this towering white cliff, that rituals of release and sacrifice were performed, and where the god's name echoed not through hymns of joy, but in solemn offerings to the unseen. Though the texts trail off, the reverence remains, for each place, each temple, each grove, and each hill held a part of the god's light. And through them, the people of Greece and the surrounding isles bound themselves to his presence, not just in times of prophecy or war, but in every silent act of healing, in every note of a lyre, and in every flame that burned on an altar beneath the sky. Leucatras was a towering white rock that jutted far out into the sea from the island of Leucas, its brilliant pale face clearly visible from afar and stretching in the direction of Kephalenia. And it was because of this shining color that the rock was named as such. Upon this steep and radiant cliff stood the temple of Apollo Leucatras, a sacred place where sky met sea and divine presence touched the edge of the world. But it was not just a place of prayer or worship. It was known for something far more haunting and strange, a ritual act of love's desperation known simply as the leap. From the high ledge of this rock, it was believed that one could rid themselves of the heavy burden of unreturned or unbearable love by casting their body into the sea, trusting in the gods to relieve their torment. The story of the leap was tied to an old tale, one spoken by Menandros, who wrote that the poet Sappho, maddened by her hopeless longing and unable to endure the pain any longer, chased after the one she loved, a man named Phaon, proud and unbending. In the wildness of her passion, she climbed to the edge of the great rock and called out to the god, asking him to hear her, to see her. And then she leapt, surrendering her heart to the sea below. Menandros called her the first, but those who studied the past more closely claimed another name, Kephalos, a hero from myths far older than the songs of Sappho. They said it was he who first took the fall, driven not by love for a woman, but for Tyrellus, the son of Dioneus. And it was through his story that the ritual gained its power and place. Each year, as the time of the festival approached, the people of the island remembered this tradition and carried it out in a way that blended justice with old magic. They chose a criminal, someone already sentenced and marked, and brought him to the edge of the rock. This was no mindless execution. It was a sacred act meant to protect the land and the people, a sacrifice performed during the rites of Apollo to push away misfortune and darkness. But the fall was not left entirely to fate. They tied wings and birds of many kinds to the man, for it was believed that the fluttering of feathers would soften his descent, slowing the fall just enough so that he might not meet his death upon the rocks. And below, in small boats scattered across the waves, men waited, ready to catch the one who fell. If they succeeded in reaching him and pulling him from the sea, they would take him beyond the borders, away from the island, a life spared, though exiled, while the land remained cleansed and safe. The people who lived in this place in the early days were called Taphians and also Teleboans. Their past was shaped by the arrival of Kephalos, who had been appointed by Amphitryon to rule over the islands near Taphos, and later extended his rule over the mainland as well. From this history, they said, came the tale that Cephalus was indeed the first to leap, and through his example, the custom began, binding memory and myth to the sacred place. High above the sea, the rock stood silent witness to all of this, its face unchanged through generations, its edge worn only by the wind and the soft pressure of countless feet who had come to stand at its brink. And during the sacred festival, which was held with devotion and solemnity, those who came did not only pray or sing, but took part in strange and ancient rites. On the day of the leap, they offered a peculiar sacrifice, not to Apollo himself, but to the flies that swarmed and troubled the ceremonies. They led out an ox and let its blood spill upon the earth, and as the flies gathered and fed, they did not strike them or chase them away, but waited, and when the creatures were full and finally flew off, they were satisfied that their bribe had worked and that the rites could continue undisturbed. Some said this tradition too was part of the balance, a way to keep harmony between things seen and unseen, a way to ensure the god's favor would not be distracted by the nuisance of small beasts. And further still, others told a different tale about the name of the rock itself. They said that Leucade did not come from its color, but from a man named Leukos, who once journeyed with the cunning Odysseus. Leukos, it was said, came from Zakynthos and was slain by Antiphos. He was the one who built the temple to Apollo at the cliff's edge, raising it not merely as a place of worship, but as a monument to memory and loss. It was said that those who threw themselves from the top of the rock did not simply seek release from love, but believed that the leap itself, the act of letting go, had the power to free them from their pain. And in one more tale whispered among the shadows, it was said that after the death of Adonis, when grief filled her like a storm, even Aphrodite looked upon this cliff and felt the pull of the leap. So the rock of Leucas stood not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol of sorrow, devotion, and the mysterious connection between body and soul, sea and sky, love and release. Every part of it, the shining face, the high edge, the birds fastened to human arms, the waiting boats below, the cries of the desperate, the prayers whispered to the god. Each was part of a tradition that stretched back into the mists of time, and though the names and faces changed, the rock remained, a white witness to the aching hearts that had stood upon it, to the cries that vanished into the wind, and to the waves that carried away the silence that always followed. She wandered far and wide, searching with restless heart and desperate eyes, until she found it in Argos, a place within the island of Kypros, where the sanctuary of Apollo Erythios stood quiet and sacred. It was there, among the old stones and flickering shadows of incense, that she confided in the god, whispering the secret pain of her love for Adonis. Her words, heavy with longing and sorrow, reached the ears of Apollo, who received them not with scorn or indifference, but with the gravity of a god who knew the weight of mortal love. After hearing her, he brought her to the towering rock of Leucade, the white cliff where sky and sea met in a sharp edge of silence, and there he commanded her to throw herself from its height. Trusting in the god, she obeyed, and as her body fell, something within her was set free. When she asked why this had cured her, Apollo, speaking as one gifted with the voice of prophecy, revealed to her the hidden truth, that long ago even the great Zeus, who was always overcome with desire for Hera, had sat upon that same rock and found himself delivered from the consuming fire of that passion. From that moment on, the rock became known, not just for its height or its brightness, but for its strange power to heal the wounds of love. Many others, both men and women, followed the same path, each burdened by love, each seeking freedom in the fall. Among them was Artemisa, daughter of Lygdamis, a woman of war and command, who had once led forces against Persia with boldness. She fell in love with Dardanus of Abydos, but he scorned her affections. In a fit of anguish, she clawed out his eyes while he slept. Yet even this did not end her love, for under the heavy hand of divine wrath, her passion only deepened. Desperate, she sought the wisdom of an oracle and was told to go to Leucad. There she climbed to the top and with no hesitation threw herself from the height, ending her pain in death. Her body was buried in the earth of that place, another life folded into the rock's quiet story. Then there was Hippomedon of Epidamnos, whose heart had turned toward a young boy of his homeland. But the boy loved another, and Hippomedon, unable to bear rejection, killed him. Afterward, consumed by guilt and unfulfilled desire, he too journeyed to Leucade, leapt from the rock, and died. The comic poet Nicostratus, who was in love with Tetigidea of Marina, chose a different end. He leapt, and though the sea swallowed his pain, his life was spared. He lived on, his heart quiet at last. Another man, Makes of Buthroton, became so associated with this strange ritual that he was surnamed White Rock, for he had leapt not once but 4 times, and each time found himself healed anew from the sharp ache of love. There were crowds of others, each one walking the lonely path to the edge, each hoping to leave their suffering behind in the wind and the waves. Among them was Buligoras the Phanagorite, who had fallen in love with a flutist named Diodoros. He was already old when he climbed the steep rock, but love had made him young with torment. He jumped, but unlike others, he did not survive. His body was broken on the rocks below. Rhodope of Amisene, a woman who loved not one but 2, twin brothers who served in the guard of King Antiochus, named Antiphon and Charos, found no peace in her tangled heart. Her love pulled her apart, and when it grew too much, she came to the cliff, leapt, and died, leaving behind a name remembered only through grief. And then there was Charinos, a poet who composed sharp and biting verses known as iambics. He loved a eunuch named Eros, the butler of Eupator, and believing in the rock's legend, he trusted that a leap would free him from his heartache. But fate had other plans. He fell badly, breaking his leg, and the pain consumed him until he died. Not quietly, but in the very act of writing his final lines. In his verse, he cursed the rock, calling it deceptive and murderous, accusing it of turning his hopeful words into ash. His poem ended with bitterness and regret, for love had taken everything from him. Then came Nereus of Catana, who loved something no one could truly possess. Athena of Athens, perhaps the goddess, perhaps only her statue, cold and silent. He came to the rock as others had, leapt, and found peace in the sea. But when he was pulled from the waters by a fisherman's net, there was more than just a soaked body. In the net lay a box, heavy with gold. The fisherman and Nereus went to court, each claiming the treasure. But in the stillness of night, Apollo came to Nereus in a dream. The god's voice was firm and filled with warning. Nereus had been spared, and that alone should be enough. The gold was not his to take, and Apollo told him to walk away, to be thankful for his life and not let greed take root where love once had burned. And so, through all these tales, each one a thread woven into the fabric of Leucade's legend, the rock stood unchanged, did not favor man or woman, youth or elder, poet or soldier. It simply received them, as it had received the sorrow of gods and the silence of the sea. The cliff was not merciful nor cruel. It was merely the place where people came when they could carry their hearts no longer. And there, in the quiet fall, some found peace, some found death, and others found something stranger still, the end of love and the beginning of whatever came next. The people of Epeiros, along with every visitor who stayed even for a while in that land, held a special day each year unlike any other, a day set apart from all other sacrifices to honor Apollo with great care, solemnity, and display. This was no ordinary feast or passing offering. It was their chief festival, held with deep reverence and remarkable ceremony. In the land dedicated to this worship stood a sacred grove, quiet and full of shadows, wrapped within an enclosure that set it apart from the world. Inside this enclosed sanctuary lived serpents, dracones, not wild or hidden, but known and honored, regarded as the sacred pets of the god himself. These serpents were not feared but venerated, and their presence was not only accepted but celebrated, for they were believed to be descended from the great python of Delphi, the serpent slain by Apollo in ancient times. Each year, a virgin priestess, alone and unguarded, would enter this sacred space. She came not with sword or incense, but simply with food for the serpents, offerings held in steady hands, guided by faith and tradition. The people of Epeiros waited outside, watching and hoping, for the serpent's behavior would tell them what the coming year would bring. If the serpents welcomed her, if they looked upon her with calm eyes and accepted the food she offered with eagerness, it was seen as a sign of prosperity, a promise of health, and a year free from sickness. But if the serpents recoiled, if they hissed and scattered and refused the gift, then all who witnessed it would understand. The year ahead would bring trouble, hardship, and illness. It was not the words of men, but the silent wisdom of the god's sacred creatures that delivered this message, and the people listened. Far to the north, beyond the borders of Greece, in the lands known as Illyria, there stood another city that bore Apollo's name, Apollonia, a Greek colony founded by the Milesians. Most of the city had grown on an island, a place where sea and sky met in quiet harmony. There too, at the center of devotion, stood a temple dedicated to the god. Within that temple once stood a colossal statue of Apollo, a creation by the sculptor Calamis, so magnificent and full of grace that it drew the eye of the Roman general Marcus Lucullus, who took it from its sacred home and set it up instead in the capital of Rome. But before it was taken, the statue had watched over the land, casting its shadow across the waters, a silent guardian of the god's presence. Another voice, that of a traveler who wandered across the Greek world, spoke of this place again, calling it Apollonia on the Ionian Sea, saying that it was founded by Apollo himself, the god of the unshorn locks, the one whose power flowed with music, light, and prophecy. In Thessalia, further inland, the god's presence was also felt deeply. In the village of Philos, part of the region of Theotis, there stood yet another temple, where Apollo was worshipped under the name Philios, tied forever to that land and its people. Not far from there, in another small village called Diepnias, near Larissa, there was a story told that connected place, tradition, and divinity. It was said that here, after the god had completed his terrible task of slaying the python and undergone his long purification, he dined for the first time upon returning from the valley of Tembe. This sacred meal became part of the tradition, and so each year, when a solemn journey was made to commemorate the god's purification, a special boy called the Daphnophorus, meaning laurel bearer, carried back a branch of laurel. and when he reached Deipnius, it was the custom that he would eat there, echoing the meal the god had once taken. This ritual bound the land and its people to the god's own journey, and in the quiet of the village, the god's memory was refreshed with every passing year. Even beyond the mainland, out among the scattered islands of the Aegean, Apollo's presence was strong. In Delos, his birthplace and one of the most sacred sites of his worship, his name was whispered through the temple halls and sung beneath the open sky. And as the winds moved over the sea, his influence stretched farther still. One tale told of a time when a Persian general named Datis journeyed through the Aegean with his army, and upon reaching the island of Mykonos, he received a vision in his sleep. Though the details of that vision were left untold, the moment itself stood as a reminder of how deeply the god's reach extended into dreams, into cities, and into the hearts of all who passed through lands where his temple stood. From the serpents of Eperos to the statue of Illyria, from the sacred meal in Deipnius to the laurel-bearing boy of Tempe, and from the quiet rock of Delos to the watchful eyes of soldiers in foreign lands, the worship of Apollo ran like a golden thread through the regions of the north and the isles of the sea, binding places and people together in acts of remembrance, reverence, and hope. And wherever his name was spoken, whether whispered in a grove carved into stone or carried on the wind, the god stood ever near, unshorn, radiant, and eternal. Datis, the Persian commander, while making a careful search through the ships under his control, came upon a Phoenician vessel, and on that ship he discovered something unexpected, a gilded image of Apollo shining and sacred even among the spoils of war. Curious and compelled, he asked the sailors where they had taken this statue from, and upon learning the name of the temple it had been taken from, he immediately chose to act. Without delay, he boarded his own ship and set sail directly to Delos, the island sacred to Apollo and known throughout the Greek world as a place of divine birth and sanctuary. The Delians, who had once fled their home, had by then returned, and it was to them that Datis entrusted the statue. He carried it personally to the temple and, showing unexpected reverence, ordered that the image be taken across the water to the coast of Boeotia, to the temple at Theban Delion that faced the island of Euboea. His command was clear, and after giving his instructions, he departed, returning to his military campaign. But the Delians did not carry out his request, and the statue remained on the island. Time passed, 20 years, and it was only then, by command of an oracle, that the Thebans came and took the image to Delion, fulfilling the task that had been left incomplete for 2 decades. Long before this, in the old days when myths lived closer to the world, there was a man named Anios who served as priest of Apollo in Delos. He was deeply connected to the god, and his own son, Thasos, once visited him in the dark of night. But during that visit, something terrible happened. Thasos was torn apart by dogs, and from that tragedy came a rule that no dog was ever again allowed upon the sacred island, for the memory of that night lingered in the stones and shadows of Delos. The poet who told this tale, one who knew the weight of stories, said the rule was old and strong, passed down without change, and yet Delos remained sacred, not only for what had happened in the past, but for the devotion that reached it from far away. Even the Hyperboreans, a people of legend who lived far beyond the Rhipaean mountains, sent offerings across vast distances to Apollo's temple on Delos, their gifts crossing lands and seas in quiet honor of the god. The temple itself was not isolated. It stood in a plain where the city of Delos was built, not far from the Lituan, the temple of Leto. Behind the city rose the rugged mountain of Kinthos, its face bare and rocky, rising above the low land and offering a watchful view over the island. A small river named Olympus ran through Delos, not wide or deep, but still a part of the island's lifeblood. And above all, it was Delos' role in the ancient stories that made it beloved. It was said, with reverence, that here, in a time when the island had been tossed like a ship by the restless winds, when no place would grant rest to a woman in labor, the goddess Leto came at last to this place. In her pain, she set her feet upon the shaking ground, and in that moment, something changed. From deep beneath the earth, 4 great pillars of adamant rose, strong and unmovable, and they held the rock in place. No longer drifting, the island became firm, and on that sacred ground, Leto gave birth to her children, Apollo and Artemis. From that day, the island became a place of wonder, its name whispered in awe by poets and priests alike. Around Delos lay the Cyclades, a group of islands that together honored the god born among them. These islands, bound by shared devotion, sent sacred envoys at public expense, brought sacrifices, and organized great choruses of maidens to sing in praise of Apollo, Artemis, and their mother. The festivals held there were not small or private. They were great and public, celebrations filled with song, prayer, and dance, all in the god's name. The fame of Delos grew steadily, known across the lands as a center of divine power and worship. But then, something happened that made it even more renowned. When the Romans destroyed the city of Corinthos, traders who had once done business there turned their eyes to Delos. The island, already sacred and celebrated, became a new hub for commerce. Traders came from Italy and Greece, sailing toward Asia, and found that Delos was well placed for their journeys. And more than that, it offered safety. The temple of Apollo granted a kind of immunity, a spiritual shield that allowed people to conduct business without fear. This protection, combined with the good location of the harbor, made Delos a center not only of religion, but of trade. Even before Corinthos fell, many Romans had already favored Delos, choosing to attend its festivals, which had slowly grown into commercial events, blending the sacred and the economic. And when the Athenians took control of the island, the link between power and religion became even stronger. Delos had become more than just a birthplace of gods or a resting place of myths. It was a crossroads of devotion, memory, and worldly exchange. Its land held stories older than cities, and its stones echoed with prayers that had crossed seas and survived centuries. The image returned by Datis, the tragedy of the priest's son, the offerings from distant lands, the laurel-bearing festivals, and the silent river, all were part of what made Delos sacred. And from the heart of that small island, Apollo's presence radiated outward, touching the lives of those who worshipped, traded, sang, dreamed, and remembered. At the same time, those in power took great care to maintain both the religious rites that honored the gods and the steady flow of trade that enriched the island. For Delos was not only a place of worship, but also a hub of commerce, where ships brought goods from across the seas and merchants mingled with pilgrims in the shadow of temples. But that peace did not last. When the generals of Mithridates, the king from the east, came with their fleets, along with the local tyrant who stirred rebellion, they brought ruin upon Delos. The temples that had once echoed with prayers were silenced, the markets once filled with voices were emptied, and the people who had walked freely beneath the sun were struck down or driven away. The island was completely devastated, and though the Romans eventually returned, reclaiming the island after Mithridates withdrew to his homeland, they found only silence. The wealth, the sacred songs, the laughter, the music, all had vanished. What remained was a broken place, stripped of its former glory, left in poverty and neglect. And so it has remained, unchanged in its desolation even to the present time, now held by the Athenians, but no longer shining as it once had when it stood at the heart of sea and story. Just a short distance from Delos, only 4 stadia away, lay the desert isle of Renea. It was barren and quiet, but it had its own sacred purpose, for it was there that the Delians buried their dead. It was not allowed to bury or burn any body on Delos itself. Even in death, the god's presence demanded purity. So strict was this rule that even dogs were not allowed upon the island, as if their presence could disturb the sacred air. In older times, Delos had been called Ortygia, and the name still lingered in stories and songs, a reminder of the island's deep past. In other parts of the world, the god Apollo was worshipped under different names and titles. At Didyma, where the Milesians had built their grand sanctuary, he was called Apollo Ulios. The Delians too honored him with this name, calling upon him as the god of health and healing. For the word Aulen meant to be healthy, and from it came the name Ule, a word tied to wellness, and even to greetings, as people would say, health and great joy to you, invoking the god with every friendly word. Apollo was the bringer of healing, and his sister Artemis was tied to this same idea. Her name, it was believed, came from the power she held to make people safe and sound. The sun and the moon, Helios and Selene, were also closely linked to both of them, for it was understood that the temperature of the air, the rise of sickness, or the gift of calm health came from the light and rhythms of the sky. And so, when people fell ill or died suddenly, they looked not to fate alone, but to these divine forces who could both protect and punish, who gave light, but also shadows. In the town of Prasiae in Attica, there stood a temple of Apollo, and it was here that a very old and mysterious journey came to its end. The first fruits of the Hyperboreans, that legendary people from the far north, were said to travel a long and secret path to reach Apollo's shrine at Delos. These offerings did not come directly, but passed from hand to hand. The Hyperboreans gave them to the Arimaspoi, who then passed them to the Isidones, who in turn handed them to the Scythians. The Scythians brought them to Sinope, and from there the Greeks carried them to Prasiae. Finally, the Athenians would take them across the sea to Delos. All this was done in silence and secrecy, for the offerings were hidden within bundles of wheat straw, and no one knew their contents. At Prasiae, a monument stood in memory of Erysichthon, a king who had died during his return journey from Delos, having fulfilled his sacred mission. In another part of Greece, in a place called Boiatai, in Lacedaemonia, there was a site sacred to Apollo known as Epidelion. There stood a wooden image of the god, one that had originally belonged to Delos. It had been taken from the island, where it once watched over traders and pilgrims alike. Delos, at that time, had been a market unlike any other, a Greek port that felt safe and blessed, guarded not by walls or soldiers, but by the god himself. But that sense of security had been shattered when Menophanes, an officer of Mithridates, arrived with a fleet. Whether acting on his own or following orders, he showed no respect for the sacred. He attacked the island, perhaps out of contempt for Apollo, or perhaps simply because he saw the wealth and did not care about the sanctity of the place. To him, profit was greater than piety. He slaughtered the foreigners who lived there, killed the native Delians, stole goods from the merchants, looted the offerings left for the god, and carried off women and children to be sold as slaves. In his cruelty, he even razed the entire island, leaving behind only ruins. Among the destruction, one of the invaders seized the wooden image of Apollo and with no thought of reverence hurled it aside. But the image survived, and it found its new home in Boyatai, where it was still honored, though its history had been marked by violence and loss. Through all these stories of ships and statues, healing and ruin, offerings and silence, the god remained, watching from the sunlit sky, his presence lingering in the stones, the wind, and the distant hymns that still rose from temples now quiet. Delos, once bright and filled with life, now stood as a memory, but the name of the god it honored lived on, carried by the faithful, remembered in ruins, and whispered in the winds that still touched its empty shores. Into the sea it was thrown, the sacred image cast carelessly by one of the invaders during the sacking of Delos. But the sea did not forget its holiness. The wave took the image, lifted it gently as if guided by unseen hands, and carried it across the waters, delivering it to the land of the Boyatai. It came to rest on the shore, and the people, witnessing this strange and fateful arrival, called the place Epidelion, meaning where it appeared. It was not just a name but a sign, a reminder that even in the face of desecration, the god's will still moved silently and powerfully through the world. And those who had shown impiety, those who had dared to defy the sacred, did not escape the judgment that followed. Menophanes, who had commanded the brutal attack and showed no respect for the sanctity of Delos, attempted to return to sea after the destruction. But his departure was not to be. The merchants, those few who had survived the massacre, had not fled far. They had waited, hidden and patient, watching the waters. And as Menophanes set sail, they struck. They surrounded him with their ships and brought him down into the depths. He was swallowed not by the sea alone, but by the vengeance of those who had lost everything. As for Mithridates himself, the king whose name had stirred fear across nations, the god did not forget. When his empire crumbled, when the strength he once wielded slipped away, and he was hunted by the very forces he had once challenged, it was said that he was left with no escape. In his final moments, cornered and desperate, he laid hands upon himself. Some say he begged one of his own mercenaries to take his life, and the man granted his request, offering a death as violent as the life he had lived. This was the final price, the dark reward of defying the sacred, of turning power against the divine. But while the wrath of the god fell heavy on some, others came to Delos with songs and offerings. In the time of Phintus, son of Sibota, the people of Messenia, for the first time, sent both a sacred gift and a chorus of men to Apollo on Delos. It was a gesture of peace and praise, of devotion carried across land and sea. Their hymn, written by Eumelos, was sung with care and purpose, and though many poems bore his name, this one alone was held as genuine, the only one believed to come truly from his hand. It echoed across the island in celebration, woven into the air as a gift to the god. Others honored the god through the work of their hands. Two artists, Anglion and Tectaus, sons of Dionysiodotos, shaped an image of Apollo, sculpting it not with haste but with vision, placing in his outstretched hand 3 charites, symbols of grace and beauty, so that even the statue radiated the divine joy and harmony that flowed from the god himself. There were others who came with burdened hearts. One story tells of a man who had once sailed with love, but returned with loss. Bereft of Ariadne, Theseus, consumed with the pain of what he had left behind, brought a wooden image of the goddess Aphrodite to Apollo's temple on Delos, he could not take it home, for to do so would be to remember, and he feared that memory would reopen the grief he wished to leave behind. And so he left the image there, placing it in the god's hands, hoping that by doing so, he could seal his sorrow in the quiet of the temple. The island of Delos was known far and wide for its temple to Apollo, and many stories were told about its origin. According to one, Delos had not always been fixed in place. It was once an island that drifted upon the sea, unanchored and unseen. Then came the moment it was needed, when Leto, in her labor, sought a place to give birth. The island rose from the water, revealed at last, and the god was born. The name Delos, meaning manifest, came from this moment of sudden appearance. Other names were also spoken of in different traditions: Cynthia, Ortygia, Asteria, Lagia, Chlamydia, Tinethus, Pyripole, each name holding a story, each a facet of the island's mythic identity. Some said it was called Pyripole because fire was first discovered there. The island was not large, only 5 miles in circumference, and its only real height was Mount Cynthius, rising above the plain, where the sun struck stone and shadow, moved slowly over the sacred ground. The people who went to Delos on sacred missions were called Deliostai, envoys of devotion, travelers who carried prayers and offerings to the heart of the god's home. And even beyond Delos, Apollo's presence was felt across the islands of the Aegean, on the island of Ceos, near the village of Coresia, and also near the ruins of Poiesa. There was a temple of Apollo Sminthios. Nearby, a temple to Athena stood as well. Both temples, it was said, had been founded by Nestor on his way back from Troy, placing stones of worship as he passed through, leaving behind footprints of sacredness along the paths of return. On the island of Lesbos, the god was honored again, and in one poetic fragment, the choir of Maloeis is described as coming forward in song, lifting their voices in praise of Apollo, their music rising into the sky, carried by wind and memory. The stories, the hymns, the punishments, the dedications, the statues, the envoys, the quiet names whispered by the sea, all were part of the same sacred breath that moved through the islands, reminding all who lived and traveled there that the god still watched, still listened, and still waited in the light and silence of his eternal home. Of Apollon on Lesbos, his worship extended far beyond one island, reaching the surrounding lands and seas with temples, titles, and sacred names that revealed the wide embrace of his presence. In Tenedos, the small island near Lesbos, there was a temple of Apollon Sminthius, and this was no ordinary shrine, for even the poet once sang of it, saying that Apollon ruled mightily over Tenedos under that name. The city there, an Aeolian city, had 2 harbours, and the temple stood near the sea, where prayers rose with the wind and the scent of salt carried offerings across the water. There was a deep connection, too, between this place and the land of Tenia in Corinthia, where another temple to Apollon Tenetus was built. The 2 places, Tenedos and Tenia, though separated by distance, were said to share a bond through Tennis, the son of Kyknos, and this shared ancestry was reflected in the similarity of the god's worship in both regions. It was not merely custom, but memory that shaped these sanctuaries, memory held in stone and ritual. Along the strait between Asia and Lesbos lay a scattered group of about 20 small islands known together as the Hekatonazoi, which meant the islands of Hekatos, a title of Apollon. Some called them the Apollonisoi, the islands of Apollon, and this name told of how deeply his worship ran along this coast. From one end to the other, from the shores to the islands, Apollon was praised under many names: Smintheus, Kylaios, Gryneus, each one echoing in a different dialect, each carrying a different shade of his divinity. Among these islands was Portoselene, the largest of them, and there stood a city of the same name. Off the shore of that city, another island lay, larger still and uninhabited, but even there stood a temple to Apollon, rising in silence, sacred without needing crowds, a place where the god's presence was honored without words, on the island of Chios, near the village of Pharnae. Apollon was worshipped in a quiet grove near the sea. There, among palm trees and gentle waves, stood a temple and a deep harbor, where travelers arrived and left, passing by the sacred place. The grove remained green and still, a place where the sea's voice and the god's presence met beneath the sky. Farther south, on the island of Samos, another temple of Apollon was known, one called Apollon Pythios. Though it was an old sanctuary, it was still not as ancient as the one at Troizenos in the Argolis, which was said to be the oldest of all Apollon's sanctuaries. Still, the Samian temple stood with reverence, marking the god's path across the islands. On the island of Chalkia, distant from Telos and farther still from Carpathos, there was another settlement, also called Chalkia, and there too stood a temple to Apollon. The harbour opened to the sea, and the temple rose near it, reminding all who arrived by ship that they had come to a place watched over by the god. In Rhodes, Apollon was worshipped under yet another name, Erythibios, Apollon of the mildew. Here, the Rhodians, using their own word for mildew, Erysibe, honoured the god who could protect or withhold, whose light could bring growth or decay, and they built a temple in his name to guard their fields and ensure their harvests. On the island of Anaphe, near Thera, stood a temple to Apollon Agletos, meaning the shining. It was a place bathed in light, and the poet once called it by name, saying Anaphe Agletos, neighbour to Laconian Thera. The god's brightness shone there not only in the sky, but in the hearts of those who came to worship. The origin of this particular cult was tied to the story of the Argonauts. Though the quiet temple stood long after their journey had ended, holding the memory in silence, in the land known as the Troad, across the water in Asia Minor, in a town called Adrasteia, Apollon was worshipped again. The temple stood there as part of a wider network of sacred spaces, places where the god's voice could be heard in the rustling leaves, the quiet hymns, and the careful steps of those who approached with reverence. These temples, scattered across the Greek Aegean and beyond, each told a different part of the same story, a god whose presence could be found in light and healing, in music and prophecy, in protection and punishment, and in the silence that followed prayer. The people of every island and coast, every harbour and hill, lifted their voices in their own ways, using names that changed from place to place, but always calling out to the same divine figure. Whether he was known as Smintheus, Teneatos, Pythios, Erythibios, Aigletos, or simply as Apollon, he stood at the heart of each sanctuary, receiving the hopes and fears of those who came to him. From the uninhabited island where his temple stood alone, to the grove of palms by the sea, to the bustling harbours and ancient hills, the story remained the same, of a god whose many names could not change the strength of his presence, whose worship stretched across water and time, and whose light, whether soft or blinding, touched every shore it reached. The city of Adrasteia, located in the region known as the Troad, rested quietly between the settlements of Priapos and Parion. its name carried down to the plain that spread out below it. In this plain, sacred to the earth and sky, there once stood an oracle of Apollon Actaios, known as the god of the shore, and beside him stood Artemis, whose name was lost in the passage of time. The oracle had once spoken with authority, a place where questions found answers and where the divine touched the world with unseen hands. But when the temple that held this oracle was dismantled, its sacred stones and treasured furnishings were not destroyed, but taken from their original resting place and transported to the nearby city of Parion. There, from these sacred remnants, a new altar was built, crafted by the hand of Hermocreon, and it was said to be striking in its beauty and immense in size. The people of Parion saw it as a marvel, but the voice of the god was silent. The oracle, like the one that once stood in Zeliah, was abolished, and no divine message was spoken there again. Not far from Adrasteia lay the plain of Timbra, where the Timbrios River flowed gently across the land. This river did not run alone. It made its way to the greater Skamandros River, and at their meeting point stood the temple of Apollon Timbraios. This sacred space watched over the flowing waters, where nature and worship met beneath the open sky. Deeper into the Troad, in the town of Chrysa, there was another temple, this one dedicated to Apollon Smintheus, a name that carried with it a curious symbol, a mouse carved beneath the foot of the god's image. The sculptor was Scopas of Paros, whose hand shaped the god in stone, and the mouse at his feet was no random decoration. It was a symbol that preserved the meaning of the god's title. There was a story passed down through poets and historians, beginning with Kalinos, who wrote of the Teucrians, people who had come from the island of Crete. These people carried with them an oracle that instructed them to settle in the place where the earthborn would rise to attack them. When they reached the area around Hamaxitos, they camped, and in the night, the prophecy was fulfilled, not by soldiers, but by field mice. In the darkness, the mice poured out of the ground and devoured the leather straps of their armor and the bindings of their weapons. It was a quiet attack, strange and without violence, but it left them vulnerable. They saw this as the sign they had been waiting for, and so they settled there, naming the nearby mountain Ida after the one they had known in Crete. The mice remained in the area, especially around the temple, and later writers like Heraclides of Pontos said that the mice were regarded as sacred creatures, living symbols of the god's presence. For this reason, the sculptor had placed one beneath the foot of Apollon's statue, giving honor to the small creature that had once fulfilled a great oracle. The importance of this region was spoken of in many layers. Homer had once called Thebe the city of Aetion, and Strabo suggested that the town of Chrysa, with its temple to Apollon Smintheus, had belonged to the same king. This idea was supported by the story of Chryseis, who was said to have been taken from Thebe during a raid. The warriors entered the city, laid waste to it, and carried off all the spoils, dividing them among themselves. From among the captives, Chryseis was chosen for the son of Atreus. If Chrysa was indeed part of Thebe, then the temple of Smintheus was bound to that same story, tied to the sorrow and spoils of war. And so, Chrysa and Killa, two ancient places in the Troad, became more than towns. They became locations where myth and memory met. In the territory around Adramyttian, both Chrysa and Killa were still known. Killa, in particular, still stood near Thebe, and a temple to Apollon Kilios could be found there. Flowing beside it was the Kilios River, which began on the slopes of Mount Ida and made its way past the sanctuary. According to Dies of Colonnae, this temple of Apollon Kilios had first been founded not in Killa, but in Colonnae itself, The Aeolians, who had sailed from Greece, brought with them their worship and their traditions, and they planted these sacred places in new lands, keeping alive the old names and the ancient gods. From city to plain, from river to shrine, from oracle to altar, the worship of Apollon in the Troad was layered and far-reaching. Each temple, whether standing in grandeur or reduced to ruins, had held the prayers of generations. Each statue, whether in marble or bronze, had been shaped with care, its symbols chosen with purpose. The gods were not distant. They were present in the land, in the mice beneath the earth, in the rivers that flowed between sacred stones, and in the names that survived the rise and fall of cities, even as temples were torn down and their stones reused, even as oracles fell silent and the voices of the gods faded from their sacred halls. The memory of them lingered. The people remembered. They passed down the stories. They spoke of the sculptors and the signs, the sacrifices and the songs. They recalled the oracle that once guided settlers to a new home, the mouse that destroyed an army's arms, and the altar that was rebuilt from the ruins of another sanctuary. And in these stories, the gods still lived, not only in the heavens or in the sun's light, but in the quiet places, the forgotten plains, the winding rivers, and the whispered names of ancient cities. It is also said that there was once a temple of Apollon Kilios established at Chrysa, though it is uncertain whether this Apollon was the same as the one called Smintheus, or a different form altogether, for the ancient traditions often gave the god many names, and each name came with a different story. Chrysa itself was a small town by the sea, with a harbour that opened into the deep blue water, and above it, up the slope, lay the city of Thebes. In that region stood the temple of Apollon Smintheus, and it was here, according to the myth, that the maiden Chryseis once lived, daughter of a priest devoted to the god, and her presence there made the place sacred in memory as well as stone. But now the place is empty. Time has passed, the people are gone, and what was once filled with prayer and ritual is now silent and forgotten. The temple itself did not vanish, but was moved from the old Chrysa to a newer location near Hamaxitos after the Cilicians were driven out, some of them going toward Pamphylia and others settling near Hamaxitos. The temple found new ground, but the memory of the old one lingered in those who knew the story. Yet not all who speak of Chrysa know the true past. There are those less acquainted with ancient history who say that the newer Chrysa near Hamaxitos was the very place mentioned by Homer, the place where Chryseis and her father lived, and where the god was honored in the time of the Iliad. But such claims do not hold, for Homer was precise in his descriptions, and the newer Chrysa does not match them. First, it has no harbour, and yet Homer clearly said, "And when they had now arrived inside the deep harbour," describing the arrival of the ship. Second, the temple in the newer Chrysa is not by the sea, and yet Homer wrote that Chryseis stepped off the seafaring ship and was led to the altar of the god with the sound of the waves close at hand. And third, the newer Chrysa is not close to Thebes, and yet Homer made it clear that Chryseis had been taken captive near Thebes, connecting the two places with the flow of his verse. There is also confusion about Killa, for there is no place with that name in the territory of the Alexandrians, and no temple of Apollon Kilios stands there either. Yet Homer mentions both Chrysa and sacred Killa together, suggesting their nearness. The true Killa is still visible, lying in the plain of Thebes, where the land stretches open beneath the sky, and the memory of the past breathes through the grasses. The journey from the Cilician Chrysa to the Greek naval station, the one used during the war told in Homer's song, is about 700 stadia, which would have taken about a full day to sail. This matches the account of Odysseus, who upon landing immediately performed the sacrifice to the god, and because night fell soon after, stayed the night before sailing back the next morning. This distance supports the idea that Homer spoke of the older Chrysa. The newer one, near Hamaxitos, lies at a much shorter distance, barely a third of the full day's journey, so if Odysseus had landed there, he would have had enough time to offer the sacrifice and return to the naval station all within the same day, which contradicts Homer's telling. Near the temple of Apollon Kilios, there also stands a great barrow, said to be the tomb of Kilos. He is remembered as the charioteer of Pelops and as a ruler of the region, and it is believed that he either founded the shrine to Apollon Kilios or that it was dedicated to him in his memory. There are those who suggest that the name Kilikia may have come from him, or perhaps he was named after the land, for the link between names and places often blurs in the passage of time. And the story of the Teucrians and the mice, the tale that gives the god the name Smintheus, should also be placed in this region. The word Sminthi, meaning mouse, in the language of the Aeolians and the people of the Troad, gives the god his title, and in the region of Hamaxitos, this connection is still remembered. There, they do not simply speak of it, they worship the mouse itself. They honor it as a sacred creature, tied to the god they call Sminthean. The mouse, small and silent, is seen not as a pest, but as a sign of divine presence. It is this belief that gave rise to the image of Apollon Smintheus, where the god is shown with one foot resting upon a mouse, a symbol placed with intention and reverence. The worship in Hamaxitos reflects this connection deeply. They do not see the mouse as mere animal, but as a companion to the god, part of his myth, part of his story. It is through these layers, temples built and moved, cities remembered and forgotten, names repeated and misunderstood, that the worship of Apollon in the Troad reveals its full form. Their sacred places once stood in strength, built from stone and song, where people came with offerings, where priests spoke the words of the gods, and where ships brought those in need of healing or guidance. The coastlines, rivers, plains, and tombs all held their place in the unfolding story, and even now, when the cities have fallen into ruin and the voices have grown quiet, the memory of these places remains. The land still carries the names, the myths still speak through the texts, and the temples, though silent, are not gone from the heart of those who remember. The god, called by many names, Smintheus, Kilios, Actios, was worshipped through many forms, and each name carried a piece of the truth, shaped by the hands and hearts of those who built the altars and told the stories. And so, even as time moves forward and the sea wears away the edges of the coast, the names remain, and with them, the quiet legacy of the god who stood in the shadow of the mountains, beside the rivers, above the mice, and in the memory of every harbour that once welcomed a ship carrying prayers into the arms of the wind. And in the temple of Smintheos, within that sacred and ancient place, tame mice are kept and carefully fed at the expense of the community, not as pests, but as symbols of something far older than fear, something woven into the fabric of worship and memory. These mice live not in secret, but beneath the very altar itself, where white mice have built their nests, burrowing under the foundation of the place where prayers rise and smoke curls toward the heavens. And by the sacred tripod of the god Apollon, there stands a sculpted mouse, a silent and eternal companion, reminding all who see it that even the smallest creatures can carry divine meaning. The people of the land remember a tale, not just as a story passed down from elders, but as a living myth that explains why these mice are kept and why the god is called by the name Smintheos. In that story, the Aeolians and Trojans once suffered a disaster that came not with fire or sword, but in the form of tens of thousands of mice. The mice swarmed the fields, appearing in numbers too great to count, and they came not after the harvest, but just before it, cutting down the crops before they could ripen, leaving the people with barren fields and empty stores. The sowers watched helplessly as the green stalks were destroyed, and they despaired. Seeking guidance, they turned to the god, asking at the oracle of Delphi what they must do to stop the ruin. The answer came clear and firm. They must sacrifice to Apollon Smintheos. They did as they were told, offering prayers and sacrifice to the god under this name, and soon after, the mice vanished. The fields returned to life, the wheat ripened as it should, and the people were saved. Alongside this tale, they tell another, a story of colonists from Crete, who, after a disaster in their homeland, were sent out to establish a new city. These exiles turned to the oracle at Pytho, asking for a sign, for guidance toward a land where they could begin again. The oracle responded with a strange riddle, saying that where the earthborn made war upon them, there they should settle and build their city. Trusting the god, the Cretans sailed and eventually reached a place called Hamaxitos, where they made camp and prepared to rest. But in the night, a strange and silent attack took place. Mice, countless and swift, crept into their camp. They gnawed through the leather straps of the soldiers' shields and chewed through the strings of their bows. By morning, their weapons were useless, their defenses broken not by sword or spear, but by the teeth of small, soft creatures. Remembering the oracle's words, they understood. These were the earthborn spoken of in the riddle. And with no way to fight and nowhere else to go, they chose to settle there. They built a city on that very spot and raised a temple to Apollon Smintheos in honor of the god who had led them, even through mice, to the place that would become their new home. The name remained, the temple stood, and the mice, far from being hunted, were honored. Pliny the Elder later wrote that the towns of Crissa and Larissa stood in that same region, and he noted that the temple of Smintheus, another form of the god's name, still stood. It had survived the passing of time, the fall of kingdoms, and the quiet forgetting that took so many places. Even in Roman memory, the temple was known, and in poetry, the god's reach continued. Seneca, in his tragedy, named the town of Scylla as sacred to Phoebus, another name for Apollon, reminding the audience that this land, this god, still carried meaning. The worship of Apollon did not stop at the edge of the Troad. In the region of Teuthrania, in the great city of Pergamon, the people held a deep devotion to the god. They honored him with a bronze statue, made by the sculptor Onatas, and it was said to be a marvel both in size and in craftsmanship. The statue was a testament not only to skill, but to faith. Onatas lived about 2 generations after the Persian invasion of Greece, and his work became part of the sacred identity of Pergamon. The city itself became known for its connection to oracles and divine insight. Philostratus wrote of a man named Apollonios of Tyana, whose reputation for wisdom spread far and wide. Reports about him came from many oracles, and one such voice, from the oracle at Colophon, said that he shared in its wisdom and was truly wise. Similar stories came from Didyma and also from the shrine at Pergamon, all tying the man to the god through sacred places and voices. Farther inland, in the region of Lydia, the worship of Apollon continued. In the capital city of Sardes, the temple of the god stood as a place of refuge. When the Persian general Kyros, aided by Amorish, marched against Croesus and captured Sardes, the defeated king fled to the temple of Apollon, hoping for safety in the presence of the god. It was a moment where war and divinity met, and where the sanctuary of the god was seen as a last hope. And not far away, in the small village of Grinaeum, also in Lydia, near the Elytic Gulf, there was yet another sanctuary of Apollon. These places, scattered across the land, formed a web of worship, each linked by name, myth, and memory. Each temple stood because someone had once believed, had once sacrificed, had once turned to the god in fear or in faith. And through them all, Apollon's Smintheos remained, not just as a god of light and prophecy, but as a protector from even the smallest dangers, a guide to lost wanderers, a name whispered when wheat failed or when strange signs crept in the dark. The mouse at his feet was no ornament. It was a symbol of power, of mystery, and of how even the quietest creatures could carry the weight of divine will. The fields once eaten grew tall again. The weapons once gnawed were laid aside, and in every place where his name was spoken, whether as Smintheos Smintheus or Phoebus, the god remained steady and still, watching from temples, from statues, and from the shadows beneath the altar where the mice still made their nests. One comes first to the harbour of the Achaeans, a place where the sea meets the sacred, where the altars of the 12 gods stand quietly, their forms weathered by wind and time, yet still honoured by those who remember. From there, the journey continues to the town of Grinaeon, a place known not only for its coastal beauty, but for the presence of an ancient altar dedicated to Apollon. This town once held an oracle, older than many, and a costly shrine built of white marble, which gleamed under the sun like the god's own light had touched it. The sanctuary at Grinaeon was not only sacred, but filled with offerings, and among them could be seen linen breastplates, soft and strong, dedicated by warriors or pilgrims, signs of thanks or prayer. These breastplates were seen in other places as well, but especially here, in the grove of Apollon that surrounded the shrine. The grove itself was one of beauty and calm, where the trees stood in cultivated lines shaped by the care of those who tended them. The trees bore fruit, while others did not, but even those that gave no harvest were cherished for their scent or the grace of their leaves, or the way their branches moved in the breeze as if whispering with the wind. The entire grove was a place of quiet, where one could feel the presence of something greater without hearing a single word. And yet, there were times when that silence became too deep, for there came a time when men stopped coming to Grinaeon for its oracles, just as they stopped visiting Claros and even the great Delphi, where the sacred tripod once spoke the will of Apollon. Instead, they turned elsewhere, and it was said that the only oracle they listened to came from Orpheus, whose severed head, carried from Threke, still gave prophecy even after death. It was told that Apollon, angered by this, came before the voice of Orpheus and told it to cease, to stop meddling in what belonged to him, for he had suffered long enough in silence, watching men turn away from his sacred places, forgetting the ancient shrines and the voice that once echoed from the deepest stone. And while the sacred shrines of the gods stood still across the lands, some remained alive in ritual and memory. In the city of Smyrna, known among the Greeks of Asia Minor, there was a unique sanctuary of Apollon, one dedicated not to stone or vision, but to sound. There, the people worshipped the god under the name Spodios, and the way they sought answers from him was through voices, divination by sound known as the cladones. This method was rare, but in Smyrna it was practiced more than anywhere else. The sanctuary stood outside the walls, beyond the city, quiet and open to the air, where the voices that carried messages came not from priests, but from chants, from birds, from wind, from any sound that stirred in the silence. From Smyrna, the sacred path continued to the town of Clazomenae in Lydia, where a temple of Apollon stood near the coast. Beyond it, the ground gave rise to hot springs, and the waters, warmed from deep within the earth, were believed to carry the healing touch of the god. The temple there looked across the gulf toward the city of Smyrna, as if the two shared a silent conversation over the water, connected by faith and by fire. But perhaps the most sacred of all these places was Claros, a quiet village near Colophon, where Apollon Clarios was honored in a sacred precinct that once held a famous oracle. The story was told that after the fall of Troy, the prophet Calchas, returning by foot from the war, came to Claros along with Amphilochus, and there he encountered another prophet, Mopsos, said to be even greater than he. Mopsos was the son of Manto, who was the daughter of the great seer Tiresias, and when Calchas saw that his own prophetic gift was surpassed, he died of grief. This tale was told with sorrow and awe, not only to honor Mopsos, but to show how deep the power of the oracle at Claros once ran. Even though the voice of the god had quieted in many places, the stories of Claros remained alive, held in the hearts of those who still walked through its ruins. And yet, not all temples remained whole. In the broader land of Ionia, where the climate was gentle and the land rich, there were sanctuaries unlike any found elsewhere. The greatest among them was the temple of Artemis Ephesia, vast and wealthy, but not far behind came two unfinished temples of Apollon. One was in Branchidae, within Milesian territory, and the other was in Claros, near Colophon. These temples, though incomplete, still held wonder, for their scale was immense and their purpose holy, and though they were never finished, their very ruins drew travelers and worshippers who stood in awe of what they might have been. Not all sanctuaries survived untouched. Two great temples in Ionia, one of Hera in Samos and the other of Athena in Phocaea, were burned by the invading Persians. Though damaged by fire, they were still a marvel to behold. Even in ruin, they stood with dignity, their ashes heavy with memory, and their stone columns rising toward the sky like prayers frozen in time. Among these sacred places, in the land of Colophon and beyond, the presence of Apollon was never far. His shrines and temples, his oracles and groves, all stood as reminders of the times when men still listened, when the voice of the god could be heard in the rustle of trees, the cry of birds, the hum of springs, and even in the random call of a passerby. The altars still bore the marks of sacrifice, the marble still gleamed where the sun touched it, and even when the voices fell silent, the stones still remembered. And so, from Grineon, with its white shrine and fragrant Noet grove, to Claros with its tale of prophets and fate, to Smyrna and Clazomenae and Colophon, the god's name echoed, and those who walked the paths between these places carried his story, not in scrolls or song alone, but in the quiet reverence with which they stepped, in the way they paused before the altar, and in the silence they kept when they listened, hoping still for the voice that once moved through marble and wind, the voice of Apollon, whose temples may fall but whose presence does not fade. There is the grove of Apollon Meliae, the god known in this place by the name that means of ash trees, and in this sacred grove the presence of the divine lingers among the tall trunks and whispering leaves, as though the trees themselves remember his footsteps. Not far from this grove flows the river Alis, a river known throughout Ionia for being the coldest of all. Its waters run sharp and clear, untouched by warmth, and their coldness is spoken of with reverence, as if the chill is part of the god's touch upon the land, and particularly in Claros, a place long honored among the cities of Ionia. The people have always given special reverence to Apollon, son of Zeus and Leto, not only the god of light and prophecy, but the father of Asclepios, the healer of mankind and protector from illness. The devotion shown in Claros is not just in word and sacrifice, but in the very nature of the place itself. For it is said that the land around Claros is untouched by poisonous creatures. No venomous beast, no snake with burning fangs, no spider with hidden danger, no scorpion that strikes with pain, dares to live in the sacred groves of Claros. The god wills it to be so, and the creatures know to fear him. He, who saves lives and watches over health, has veiled this place in purity. The ancient writer Nicandros spoke of this as well, confirming that no viper nor spider nor scorpion could be found in Claros. He described how Apollon himself had covered the deep grotto with ash trees and had purged the floor of the grove of every harmful thing. It was as if the god had built a sanctuary not just in stone, but in nature itself, creating a space where danger could not tread and where worshippers could walk safely under the leaves, hearing only the wind and the distant murmur of oracles. And this place, Claros, was not unknown to the world. It was among the many oracles that whispered truth to those who came seeking, and one of those who gained fame for his wisdom was said to have received word from the oracle at Colophon, which was the site of Claros. The prophet Apollonios of Tyana, a man whose life was marked by wonder and learning, was said to share in the wisdom of this place. From Claros, it was announced that he held its peculiar wisdom and was absolutely wise, a man whose insight reached beyond ordinary thought. But time passed, and the voices of the oracles began to fade. Apollon saw that men no longer came to Grineon for answers, nor to Claros, nor even to Delphi, where once the sacred tripod stood and the god's voice echoed from stone. Instead, they turned to Orpheus, whose severed head had floated from Threg and still sang prophecies. The god, seeing his oracles neglected, went before that strange prophet and demanded that he cease to interfere, for Apollon had been silent long enough. He had watched as others took his place, and now he had come to reclaim his voice. And still the journey across Ionia led from one sacred place to another. After leaving Ephesos, a traveller would come to Colophon, a city lying more inland, along the river Halisus, and there stood the temple of Clarion Apollon, another of the god's faces, another name tied to place and power. This temple stood firm, a marker in the landscape, watched over by groves and rivers, bound to the story of the god's presence in the land. Not far away, in the territory of Ephesos, in the wide Kaistros plain, lay the village of Larissa, which in earlier times had been more than a village. It had once been a city, and in that city stood a temple of Apollon Larissaios, a name that clung to the place like the wind to the fields. The city had faded, but the name of the god remained, and the land still held the memory of his worship. It was said that Larissa stood closer to the slopes of Mount Tmolos than to Ephesos, and the mountain rose behind it, shaping the sky and casting long shadows over the fields. And on the same coast, slightly above the sea, and not far from the great city of Ephesos, there was another place sacred to the god and his story. This place was Ortygia, not the island of the same name elsewhere, but a grove, magnificent, and filled with all kinds of trees, though most of all the cypress, which stood tall and dark and fragrant. The grove of Ortygia was crossed by the river Kenkrios, and it was here, in this quiet sacred place, that Leto was said to have bathed herself after the pain of giving birth. For this place was believed to be the very setting of the god's birth, and of his sister's birth, and of the nurse called Ortygia, who had tended to them. Here, beneath the trees and beside the water, was the holy spot where the birth took place, and near it stood an olive tree, still growing, still rooted, where the goddess herself was said to have rested for the first time after her labor. The land remembered, even if the people forgot. Each tree and stone, each stream and grove held the trace of the god, and through every sanctuary and forgotten village, every ruined city and still standing shrine, his name was carried. From Claros to Colophon, from Larissa to Ortygia, from the grove of ash trees to the cold waters of the river Alis, the god's presence was not in thunder or flame, but in the quiet spaces, the places where no snake slithered, no spider wove its web, and no scorpion dared to sting. The god of light, of healing, of all oracles and truth, stood silently in the shadow of trees, beside rivers that never warmed, and in temples where marble still caught the light. And even though the voices of the oracles might fade, the land itself never stopped speaking his name. Relieved from her travail, Leto finally found rest in the grove, a place above which rose Mount Solmissos, standing tall with the weight of ancient memory. Here, it is said, the Curetes had once stationed themselves, armed and vigilant, creating a great din by clashing their weapons together in a rhythmic thunder. Their noise was not for war, but for protection. For at that time, jealous eyes had turned toward Leto, and Hera, driven by suspicion and wrath, sought to spy upon the birth. But the Curetes, loyal and cunning, created such a fierce clamor that it frightened her away, concealing what needed to remain hidden. Thus, in that moment of fear and sound, Leto's children were safely born, and the grove was marked forever as a sacred site touched by divine secrecy. All around this area, temples had risen, some built long ago and others raised in later times. The ancient temples still stood, with their weathered shapes and silent corners, holding within them many old wooden images whose origins were shrouded in centuries of devotion. These figures, rough and simple, bore witness to prayers whispered through generations. In contrast, the newer temples, proud with cleaner lines and newer stones, held works from the hands of sculptors, an artist of great renown. Among his creations was the image of Leto, upright and calm, holding a scepter on her hand, and beside her stood Ortygia, the nurse, captured forever in stone with a child resting gently in each of her arms. This was not just a scene frozen in sculpture, but a moment preserved for worshippers to remember. The place pulsed with life, especially during the yearly festival, a great gathering when people came from far and near. Youths competed for honor, and their competitions weren't in war or in games of strength alone, but also in the beauty and richness of the feast they held. It was a celebration of presence, of abundance, and of reverence. At the heart of it all was a special group, a college of the Curetes, who performed rituals that were hidden from common sight. They held symposiums and enacted mystic sacrifices, their actions wrapped in secrecy, their meanings carried forward only through the tradition of those who had been initiated. Not far away, in the shadow of Mount Tmolos, there was another layer to the god's reach. For during one of his festivals, a figure of myth was born. Marcius, the flutist, whose end would be marked by pain, was said to have come into being during a time when flayed skins were offered to the god. The skins of those sacrificed were laid before him, each one a reminder of the cost of pride and the sharp judgment of the divine. Further south, the worship of Apollon took root in Caria, in a place known as Triopium, or the Triopian. It was a promontory in Doris, a coastal place where the Dorians had made their mark. Herodotus told how long ago the land of the Dorians had been known as the country of 6 cities, but then one fell away, and it became the country of 5. The temple of Apollon Triopios was at the center of a shared reverence among the cities: Lindos, Ialassos, Kamiros, Kos, and Knidos, each joined in sacred unity, yet strict in their laws. In games held for the god, winners were rewarded with bronze tripods, which by tradition were never to be taken from the temple grounds. Instead, they were to be offered back, dedicated to the god in gratitude and humility. But once, a man from Halicarnassus broke that law. His name was Agathocles, and when he won the prize, instead of leaving it in the temple, he took it home and nailed it to the wall of his house. That single act of pride shattered the unity, and the 5 cities declared that Halicarnassus would no longer be allowed to share in the temple. From 6 cities to 5, and from unity to exclusion. Such was the power of a single disobedience in the eyes of the god. Not far from this place, near Miletus in Ionia, there stood Branchidae, also called Didyma, a sacred village whose oracle drew the footsteps of kings and the whispers of nations. When the Lydian king Croesus feared the advance of the Persians, he sent messengers not to one oracle but to many. Among them was Branchidae, and he sought its counsel just as he did from Delphi and others. He wanted to know what the future held, what choices to make, and when he sent his gifts heavy in gold and full of meaning, Branchidae received offerings equal in weight to the richest places in Greece. The oracle there, like others, spoke not just to individuals but to the currents of history. This land, so full of sacred corners and hidden wisdom, had gathered the breath of the god and carried it on the wind. Each shrine, each statue, each tablet of prophecy told part of a story that stretched from the groves of Ortygia to the slopes of Mount Tmolus, from the bronze offerings of the Triopian to the veiled voices of Branchidae. In all these places, Apollon was not just a figure of worship, but a presence that shaped decisions, judged pride, protected the weak, and stood against hidden dangers. Through stone and sacrifice, through feast and flame, his memory lingered. Though time moved on and cities rose and fell, the echoes of his story remained in the temples, in the groves, and in the silence between the words of the oracles that once spoke with his voice. Persia, when he burned the temple. This statue, a sacred figure of Apollon, had been seized and taken away during the Persian invasion, when the fire consumed the sacred places and the betrayal of the Branchidae priests led to the loss of not only wealth but trust. Yet Seleucus, upon securing power and reaching a position of influence, chose to return what had been taken. He did not do so to gain favor or glory, but because he felt it was right, and because he understood the weight that such a sacred image held for the people of Miletus. This act, quiet and deeply meaningful, was one of restoration, not just of a statue, but of memory and of spiritual connection. And this place, the sanctuary of Apollon at Didyma, held more than just carved stone. The site, long before the fire and the betrayal, had been a beacon, a place where kings and commoners came to ask questions that twisted inside the heart. It was there that offerings from Delphi and beyond were brought, not only for wealth, but also as a gesture of binding reverence. Even the garments worn in battle, such as those sent by Nikos, the Egyptian king, after he won victories against the Syrians at Magdalos and took Caditis, were given to the god in gratitude. These clothes, once wrapped around a body in blood and fire, were laid before the oracle as symbols of life spared and triumph gained. It was not just rulers who sought the god's word. The story of one man named Lycos, who travelled from distant Kaunos with a longing heart, shows how ordinary desire met the divine. Lycos and his wife had no children. In his search for guidance, he journeyed to the oracle at Didyma, hoping for an answer to a quiet pain that many understood but few spoke of. The oracle told him that he would have a child with the first woman he lay with after leaving the shrine. Such answers were never simple, and from them came tales of love and complication, joy and sorrow, as the god's word, though clear, always led down roads filled with choice. And within the stone walls of Didyma, the figure of Brancos, the original priest of the temple, loomed in legend. Said to be descended from one who had struck down Neoptolemus, he was not merely a man, but a figure suspended between myth and memory. The place itself was tied to him through the story of Apollon's love, as told in whispers and carved in old stones, where the divine and the mortal met not in thunder, but in quiet affection. The temple, vast and incomplete, stood as the largest in the known world, built after the fires of Xerxes but never finished, its roof left open to the stars as if waiting for heaven's approval. Within its bounds, a village grew, homes and paths winding through the sacred space, blurring the line between the holy and the lived-in. Sacred groves spread both inside and outside the sanctuary's walls, with trees tall and listening. These were not just patches of land, but spaces where the sacred hovered just above the ground, where the rustling leaves whispered stories older than speech. Among these groves, scattered throughout, were shrines and smaller enclosures that held offerings, statues, tripods, relics of battles, and works from artists whose names had not been lost. Even after destruction and betrayal, the sanctuary became a living thing again, holding not only the echoes of the past, but also the breathing present. The people who lived nearby, whether in the village that had grown inside or in the city not far away, still called upon the god, invoking him with the name Apollo Oulios. In this name, which meant health and healing, they remembered the god's power not just to guide, but to mend. The word itself, rooted in the verb oula, to be healthy, reminded them of the god's touch in every breath that returned after illness, in every wound that closed. This was the god to whom they said, "Health and joy to you," because he was more than a god of oracles. He was a protector of life. The god's reach had stretched far and long. His worship continued not only in Didyma and Miletos, but wherever his voice had once echoed. And when the Persian king Xerxes marched through, setting flames to temples and dragging treasure behind him, it was not just gold that he took. He took silence. He took memory. And yet, even after fire and loss, even after the Branchidae priest chose exile over punishment, the sanctuary came back. With each rebuilt wall and each returning prayer, it reclaimed what had been torn. In time, the gesture of Seleucus, sending back the bronze statue taken in the flames, stood not only as justice, but as a beginning. It was a signal that what had been broken could be restored, that even in the ashes, the sacred could find root and rise. And so Didyma, through ruin and betrayal, through prophecy and stone, stood once more as a place where people came to ask, to hope, and to heal. The campaign, the people of Miletus carried with them not only arms and ships, but also their deep trust in the god whose voice echoed from the sanctuary of Didyma. The oracle there, older than even the arrival of the Ionian settlers, had long stood as a place of sacred questions and weighty answers. Before swords were drawn and sails set, they would ask the god what fortune lay ahead, and the responses shaped their choices and inspired their courage. The temple of Apollon at Didyma, vast and unfinished, had been sculpted by hands like those of Kanakos, the artist from Sicyon, who had also crafted the Apollon Ismenios in Thebes. Though one image was of bronze and the other of wood, their likeness revealed the same mind behind their form. Each stood not just as statues, but as presences, silent yet commanding, unmoving yet powerful, drawing worshippers near with reverence and awe. The land itself, that of Ionia, was known for its beauty, for a climate that seemed made to nurture life and inspire devotion. Amid its lands stood sanctuaries so grand they rivaled any found across the world. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus was the greatest, but even the unfinished sanctuaries of Apollon at Branchidae and Claros held a wonder that fire could not destroy. When the Persian king Xerxes came with flame and fury, he laid waste to many temples. The temple of Hera in Samos and the temple of Athena at Phocaea were burned, their stone blackened and cracked. Yet even through ruin, something of their holiness remained, for when travelers came, like the careful Pausanias, they found in these places not loss alone, but a kind of glory that clung to the ruins. Among the things taken by Xerxes was the bronze statue of Apollon at Branchidae, which he carried away in retribution against the Milesians, accusing them of cowardice in battle. That statue, like a prisoner of war, crossed into Persia, yet it was not forgotten. Many years later, Seleucus, acting not with conquest but with respect, returned the statue to Miletus. It was an act of restoration, of healing what had been torn. This same image, though far from Thebes, was remembered for its twin, the Apollon Ismenios, so similar in shape that any who had seen one could recognize the hand that shaped the other. In Thebes, it stood carved from cedarwood, and in Branchidae from shining bronze, but both carried the same face of divinity. And even beyond the temple walls, the god's influence moved through oracles and visions. At Didyma, a voice once spoke of the Triton, a sea-born creature, child of Poseidon, with a clear voice and a strange form. It was through Apollon's words that knowledge of such beings travelled, wrapped in mystery, drifting like mist across the waves. From the sanctuary at Colophon to that at Pergamon, rumours and revelations spread, whispered by priests and carried on the breath of travellers. The name of Apollon and the stories of his sacred places lived not only in stone, but in speech. And in Miletus itself, the god's presence was not abstract. When the people took up arms against Naxos, they did so with the god's will guiding them, his wisdom shaping their intent. The oracle at Didyma was not only a place to ask, but a place to trust, and that trust moved nations. The town of Miletus, once full of life and ships, sent its people out not just to conquer, but to act within the bounds of what had been foretold. Even when the temple remained incomplete, its roof never built, its columns rising into the sky, it stood firm. The grove around it was thick and sacred, and inside the sacred enclosure, both people and gods seemed to walk together. Among those who came to the sanctuary were not only warriors and kings, but also artists, prophets and seekers. One of them, Apollonios of Tyana, was said to have shared in the peculiar wisdom of the oracles, his name rising through the shrines of Colophon, Didyma, and Pergamon alike. Through him and others like him, the voice of Apollon moved, sometimes quiet, sometimes sharp, always clear to those who dared to listen. And so, the sanctuary of Apollon at Didyma, with its ancient oracle and its unfinished form, became more than a building. It was a place where time lingered, where memory was thick, and where even after ruin, something sacred remained. The god statue, once stolen, had returned. His words, once spoken, echoed still. The grove was green, the floor was clean of harm, and the voice of the god remained. A whisper in the wind, a silence in the stone, a fire that neither time nor war could ever quite extinguish. The people of Themyscira, who lived above Laodicea in the rugged lands of Phrygia, found safety through an act of deep devotion. When the invading army of the Gauls moved across the lands of Ionia and crept toward their borders, bringing destruction and terror, the Themyscirians remembered the ancient tales and turned to the gods. They did not flee in panic, nor did they arm themselves in vain resistance, but instead sought refuge in a sacred place, a hidden sanctuary carved into the side of the hills. This place, tucked away from the open roads, was a cave dedicated to the gods, and within it were ancient wooden images of deities, among them a revered figure of Apollon. Here, the townspeople hid and waited, trusting that the protection of the god would shield them from harm. The invaders passed by, unaware of the sacred haven and the lives hidden within. The people of the town would always remember this moment, and they gave thanks to the god who had preserved them in the time of greatest danger. Far to the west, in the region of Ionia, another sacred site rested near the river Letheos, close to the city of Magnesia. Here was a place known as Alai, or the Halls, where a small cave bore the spirit of Apollon. Though the cave was not grand in size, it held a figure of the god that was incredibly old and powerful. The strength it gave to those who worshipped there was said to be unlike anything else. The men who served the god at this place proved their devotion in ways that seemed beyond human limits. They would leap from steep cliffs and carry massive trees on their shoulders along narrow paths, as if to show that faith gave them the strength to conquer any obstacle. The image inside the cave, weathered with time, stood not as a relic of the past, but as a living source of divine endurance, guiding those who still believed. Further south in the warm lands of Lycia, the god's presence remained just as alive, though it took on many shapes. Near the village of Chianae, there was a spring connected to Apollon Dyaxius. The water was more than just clear. It was said to reveal visions to those who looked into it. People came to the spring hoping to see answers, perhaps faces they missed or futures they feared. The spring showed them what they sought, and its surface became a mirror for truths that could not be found elsewhere. In the city of Patara, the voice of Apollon echoed from his temple, and travelers came not only to honor him, but to look upon a great bronze bowl kept inside the sanctuary. The people of the city said that this bowl had been made by the god of fire and forge himself, and that it was offered by a great hero of old. Though the hero's name belonged to the age of Troy, the bowl remained behind, linking the ancient world to the living faith of the present. Still within Lycia, in the coastal town of Myra, there was a curious ritual performed by the priests of the god. Near a quiet bay where the sea met the land gently, there was a shrine where Apollon received offerings. When calves were sacrificed, the priest would scatter their flesh into the waters, and from beneath the surface, the sea perch would rise in swarms. If the fish devoured the offering, it was a good sign. The god was pleased, and the hearts of the people were lifted. But if the fish refused to eat, or worse, thrashed the meat away with their tails as though to reject it, then it was understood that Apollon was angry. The people would wait with held breath, watching the water and the behavior of the fish, for in this display, they read the mood of the god. They even believed the fish could recognize the priest's voice, swimming up only when summoned, and if they came, joy would ripple through the town. If not, worry would grow like a shadow. Back in Ionia, during times of celebration, the people of Miletus would observe the Thargelia, a festival held in honor of Apollon and his twin. It came in the early warmth of summer, when the sun was high and the days were long. This was a time of singing and strong drink, of joy shared without fear. The people would spend freely, caring little for cost, letting the god's light guide their laughter. Their joy filled the streets, and for a moment the worries of the world slipped away. Even in times of conflict, as when the Milesians once went to war against Naxos, they carried their festivals with them, for their devotion could not be left behind. And across all these lands, from the caverns of Phrygia to the shores of Lycia, from the quiet groves of Ionia to the sacred springs and ancient bowls, there moved the enduring presence of Apollon. Sometimes he spoke through water, sometimes through flame, sometimes through silence, or the rise of fish from the sea. Sometimes he asked for songs, and sometimes he gave strength to those who dared to leap. In every place, his worship wove through life like a golden thread, binding people together in shared ritual, shared fear, and shared hope. His temples, both grand and humble, stood not only as places of stone, but as homes for the voice that never faded, even when the world changed. His image endured in bronze and wood, and his name was carried from oracle to oracle, from mountain to sea, across the vast and sacred land. They were helped by Heracles, Apollon, and Hermes, who revealed in dreams to the leaders of Themisonion that salvation could be found within a hidden place, a cave not far from the city. In those dreams, the gods instructed the magistrates to take all their people, men, women, and children, and lead them into that cave to remain hidden during the time of danger. The people obeyed the divine message, gathering in silence and secrecy, carrying their belongings and their hopes, moving through narrow paths to reach the cave shown in the dreams. Once inside, they found cold springs flowing from within the rock, giving them water to survive. The cave was deep, with no visible entrance from outside, and the light of the sun could barely penetrate its darkness. Most of the cave's ceiling hung so low it nearly touched the ground, forcing everyone to move with care. Yet, within this confined space, they found protection and survived, hidden from their enemies. To honor the gods who saved them, they later placed small figures before the entrance, simple sacred images known as the gods of the cave, representing Heracles, Hermes, and Apollon, the ones who had watched over them. Far to the south, across the sea, was the island of Kypros, where Apollon was worshipped in many places, each holding stories of reverence and protection. One such place was Carion, a city that looked over the edge of the sea, marking the beginning of the voyage west toward Rhodes. At a nearby promontory stood the altar of Apollon, and it was said that if anyone dared touch it unlawfully, they would be cast from the rocks into the sea. This custom revealed how serious and sacred the altar was to the people. The land around Carion was also home to many deer, graceful creatures that were closely tied to the god. When hunters chased them, and the deer ran into the sanctuary of Apollon at Coreus. The dogs would bark but never enter. It was as if the animals themselves sensed the boundary of the divine, and the deer, once within that space, stopped running and began to graze calmly. They showed no fear, trusting something unseen, and the people believed it was the god himself who protected them. Another place in Kypros, a town called Argos, held a smaller and more personal story. After the death of Adonis, Aphrodite wandered in sorrow, searching for a way to ease her broken heart. Her journey led her to this town, to the sanctuary of Apollon Erythios. It was there that she found the remedy she had been seeking, and it was said that she confided her pain to Apollon, telling him the secret of her love. The god, in turn, gave her the wisdom to move forward, and she left the sanctuary with peace in her heart. The shrine thus became known not only as a place of worship, but also as a place of healing, a sacred place where even the divine sought comfort. Beyond the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, across deserts and the Nile, Apollon's name was also known in Egypt, especially in the city of Naucratis. This city had been given to the Greeks by the Egyptian king Amasis, who had a deep love for Greek culture. He allowed the Greeks who settled there to make it their home and welcomed those who visited briefly to worship freely. In Naucratis, each group of Greeks built sanctuaries for their gods, one for Zeus, one for Hera, and among them one surely for Apollon. These sacred spaces became places of community and devotion, standing as signs of shared belief in a foreign land. The gods of Greece had followed their people into Egypt, and the gifts of Amasis made Naucratis a meeting point between worlds. In every one of these places, from the hidden cave in Phrygia to the deer-filled groves of Kypros, from the sorrowful heart of a goddess to the distant altars in Egypt, there stood reminders of the reach of Apollon. He was present not only in mighty temples and marble statues, but also in the quiet spring, the trusting animal, the dream that saved a town, and the soft word that soothed a grieving soul. His voice moved through the dreams and instincts, omens and melodies, fire and water, and those who believed in him listened with their hearts. Whether in lands of lush forest or desert stone, whether among Greeks or foreigners, his name continued to be spoken with reverence, and his light, whether fierce or gentle, never truly faded. And the Milesians for Apollon, wherever they traveled and wherever they settled, never ceased to honor the god who had guided them, protected them, and spoken to them through oracles. In distant places and foreign lands, from the warm islands of Sicily to the green hills of Gaul, the name of Apollon echoed across seas and valleys, engraved in stone and sung in rituals. In the city of Syracusa, far across the Ionian Sea on the island of Sicily, the temples stood tall and filled with treasures offered to the gods. But when power fell into the hands of Dionysios, a man who ruled with ambition and strength, the sacred spaces suffered. This tyrant, in his desire for wealth and control, stole many sacred objects from the temples of the city. He stripped the statue of Zeus of its clothing and ornaments, taking what had been offered with devotion. And from the statue of Apollon too, he took what was meant to honor the divine, showing no fear in touching what should not be touched. Yet the god remained present, silent but powerful, his presence never tied only to gold or jewels, but to the memory, the belief, and the rituals that survived even the plundering of kings. In Campania, in the southern lands of Italia, Apollon's name was also spoken. The city of Naples, once called Neapolis, had taken root as a Greek colony, and the people there celebrated the god with joy and pride. A sacred contest was held, one that lasted many days and brought together talents of body and voice. It was not only a festival of strength, but also of song and music, where performers showed their devotion through skill and beauty. This contest became one of the most admired in the land, standing beside the great celebrations of Greece itself. The rhythm of celebration filled the streets, and Apollon, the god of harmony and music, watched as the people gathered to honor him in both voice and movement. Further along the coast, in the town of Cumae, where the whispers of prophecy once echoed through the mouth of the Sibyl, there was a sanctuary dedicated to the god. There, people spoke of boar's tusks that had been placed in the temple, said to be from a great beast once hunted. Though many doubted the truth of the tale, the presence of such a relic revealed how the name of Apollon had drawn stories and symbols to his temples, turning each shrine into a place where legend met belief, beyond the hills of Campania, into the deeper heart of the Italian land, was Etruria, a place filled with its own traditions and sacred spaces. Even here, the name of Apollon was known and his presence honored. But history remembered how Dionysios, the same ruler who had stripped Syracusa of its treasures, sailed to these lands as well. In Tyrrhenia, he once again stepped into temples and took what had been offered to Apollon and to other gods, including silver items placed beside statues. He ordered his men to raise their cups and drink a toast to the benevolent spirit as they carried away a silver table, lifting it from its place beside Apollon's image, as though mocking the divine while pretending to praise it. Yet, even in the face of such acts, the sacred continued in the land. On Mount Soracte, a peak near Rome within the Phalisan region, there lived a group of people called the Herpi. They were known for a unique ritual performed every year in honor of Apollon. During this ceremony, they walked barefoot over burning logs, stepping on the flames without being burned. This miracle was not seen as a trick, but as a sign of their bond with the god. Because of this, they were given special rights by the Roman Senate. They were freed from the duties of war and tax, their service to the god standing above all other obligations. In every step they took on fire, the sacred mystery was reborn. Further to the west, in the distant land of Gaul, there stood the city of Massilia, founded by Greeks who had once sailed from Phocaea. There, on a high rocky headland that overlooked the sea, two temples stood side by side. One was called the Ephesian, and the other a temple to Apollon Delphinios, the dolphin god. It was said that this temple was sacred to all the Ionians who had crossed the sea and made this place their new home. On that hill, facing the open waters, the god's temple stood as a sign that even here, far from the Aegean shores, Apollon watched over his people. The winds of Gaul whispered through the columns, and the voice of the god, though distant from his birthplace, still stirred in the hearts of those who came to offer, to sing, and to remember. In every city, every region, and every land where Greeks once walked, the name of Apollon left behind footprints made of song, fire, and stone. His temples stood in islands and mountains, beside springs and on rocky shores, and even when they were robbed or forgotten, they held something unbroken. Whether in music or prophecy, in healing or celebration, the god's presence flowed through time like sunlight touching the earth. Each ritual, each relic, and each act of faith told a part of the same story, a story not of one place but of many, not of one moment but of centuries. The god whose light once rose over Delos and Delphi had spread far and wide, and though temples might crumble and names might fade, the spirit that moved through them remained steady, alive in memory and myth.